Your daughter has not spoken in 3 years, my king. The council cannot wait any longer. Lord Marek said it the way he said everything, without looking up from his ledger, as if the words were a line item that needed balancing. I stood at the window of my study, watching the willows bend over the mere, and I thought about how many times I had heard that sentence. 3 years of it, dozens of candidates, each one announced with ceremony, installed in a guest chamber with freshly pressed linens and a guard who knew the route to Lyra's rooms. Each one departed within the fortnight, sometimes within the week, carrying a polite letter of thanks and a purse of silver I had no business spending. My daughter did not scream, she did not throw things. She simply looked through them as though they were made of glass, and she could see the wall behind. Eventually they understood what she meant, and they left. I will not force a woman on a child who does not want one, I said. No one is suggesting force, my king. Marek turned a page. We are suggesting urgency. She is 5. She has not spoken a word since Queen Senna passed. The healers say there is nothing wrong with her throat. The council believes, and I say this with respect, that the child needs a mother. I knew what the council believed. I heard their whispers at every meal. The Alpha King of Ashenmere, 34 years old, 4 years a widower, ruling a lakeside kingdom he could manage with one hand, while the other reached for a daughter who would not reach back. They thought I was letting grief make me soft. They thought I should remarry for alliance. They thought Lyra was a problem that could be solved by installing the correct woman in the correct room at the correct hour. I turned from the window. Send the next one then. Lady Brenna of Aldsworth, Marek said, still writing. Well-born, patient, 2 nieces she's raised. Send her. He nodded and left. I sat down at my desk and looked at the small drawing pinned to the wall above the ink. Lyra had made it the week before Senna died, a wobbly circle with 2 dots for eyes and a curved line beneath. A face. It was the last thing she had given me with her own hands, and it was the only piece of art in my study. Every other wall in the keep held banners, painted shields, festival scenes, all of them the work of the painter's room, the staff I barely knew by name. The walls of Ashenmere were bright because someone made them bright. I had never thought to ask who. That was the autumn. The lanterns were late. The Lantern Festival was the oldest tradition in Ashenmere, older than the keep, older than the Pact Charter. Every year on the last night of the harvest moon, the kingdom floated 200 painted paper lanterns on the mere and watched them carry the summer out. The children painted their own. The court painted theirs. The surplice, the great ceremonial lanterns, the ones that lined the processional walk from the keep to the water, were painted by the festival staff. They arrived in crates, finished and beautiful, and no one asked where they came from, the way no one asks where the firewood comes from as long as the hall is warm. That year the crates were late. I heard about it because my steward heard about it because the head of the household staff heard about it from someone in the kitchen corridor. A painter, apparently, who was behind schedule because her apprentice had taken ill and she was finishing the order alone. I did not care about this. I mention it only because it was the reason Lyra wandered into that room. My daughter's daily route through the keep was as fixed as a sentry's. She rose, ate what the kitchen maid brought her silently, carefully, leaving the crusts, and then walked. She walked the east corridor to the garden, sat among the herbs for exactly as long as the sun took to clear the wall, and walked back. She walked the north corridor to the library, sat in the window seat with a book she could not yet read, and walked back. She walked the kitchen corridor to the back stairs and climbed to the battlement, where she watched the mere until someone came to bring her in. She had walked these routes for 2 years without variation. The household staff knew them. The guards knew them. I knew them the way I knew my own heartbeat, constant, steady, the only rhythm left in a keep that had gone quiet when Senna died. On the 14th day of the harvest month, Lyra walked the kitchen corridor and stopped. I was not there. I heard it afterward from Gareth, my captain of guard, who had it from the kitchen maid who saw it happen. The door to the painter's room, a side room between the pantry and the linen closet, easy to miss, was open. It was usually closed. Lyra stopped. She looked inside. What she saw, according to the maid, was a woman sitting cross-legged on a low stool surrounded by paper lanterns in various states of completion. Some hung from the ceiling beams on strings. Some were propped on the table, still wet. Some were stacked in finished crates near the door. The woman was painting, a long, unhurried brushstroke across a sheet of treated paper, turning blank white into a curve of amber that looked like firelight reflected in lake water. She had dark hair pulled back with a rag, a plain working dress the color of undyed linen, and paint on her hands. Not a spot or two. Her fingers were stained to the second knuckle, amber, cobalt, a streak of vermilion that ran up her left wrist like a vine. Lyra stood in the doorway and watched. The woman did not look up. She did not smile at the child or speak to her, or lean forward with the bright, careful attention of someone who has been told the king's daughter is fragile. She finished her brushstroke, set the lantern aside, and reached for the next. After a while, the maid did not know how long. She said it felt like the duration of a bread rise. Lyra walked into the room. She sat on the floor near the woman's stool, not beside her, not at her feet. A body's length away, close enough to see the painting but far enough to leave without being noticed. The woman glanced at her once. Then she reached across the table, picked up a brush, a smaller one, the kind used for details, and placed it on the stone floor between them, alongside a shallow dish of blue paint. She did not say anything. She did not gesture. She placed them there and went back to her work. Lyra looked at the brush for what the maid estimated was several minutes. Then she picked it up. When Gareth told me this, I made him repeat it twice. My daughter, who had not voluntarily touched a new object in 2 years, who would not hold the dolls the healers offered or the embroidery the governesses pressed upon her, who sat in the library holding books she'd had since she was 2 and refused any others. My daughter had picked up a stranger's paintbrush and put it to paper. "What did she paint?" I asked. Gareth looked uncomfortable. "A line, sire, just a line, blue." "And then?" "She put the brush down and left, walked her usual route to the battlement." I sat with that for a long time. A line, blue, it was nothing, it was everything. The next morning I positioned myself in the kitchen corridor, well before Lyra's usual circuit. I leaned against the wall near the pantry door, arms folded, trying to look like a king who had business near the bread stores. 2 kitchen staff passed me with baskets and said nothing, because no one questions the Alpha King's choice of hallway, even when the choice is obviously absurd. Lyra came around the corner at her usual time. Small steps, small hands, the gray wool dress she preferred because it had belonged to her mother and had been altered 3 times to keep fitting. She walked the corridor. She reached the painter's room. The door was open. She stopped. She looked inside. The woman was there, painting again. This time the lantern under her hands was deep green, and the brushwork was finer leaves, I thought, or the scaled pattern of willow bark. She wore the same undyed dress, the same paint on her hands. She sat on the same low stool and worked with the same unhurried focus, and she did not look up when Lyra appeared in the doorway. Lyra walked in. She sat on the floor the same distance away. The woman reached across the table without breaking her stroke. A brush, the same small one, appeared on the floor between them, beside a dish of green paint this time. She said nothing. Lyra picked it up faster today. She leaned over a blank sheet of paper the woman had placed near the paint dish. I had not seen her do it. It was simply there, as if it had always been there, and she drew. Not a line this time. A circle, crooked green with a wobbling edge. She looked at it, then looked at the woman. The woman glanced at the circle. She nodded once, not praise, not encouragement, just acknowledgement, the way one painter might nod at another's work, and went back to her lantern. Lyra drew another circle, then another. She drew circles for 20 minutes while I stood in the corridor with my heart in my throat, watching my daughter do something she had not done since her mother was alive. She left the same way, silent, unhurried, her usual route. I waited until she was gone, then I stepped into the painter's room. The woman looked up. For the first time I saw her face, even-featured, steady-eyed, not beautiful in the way the court meant it, but striking in a way I had no word for. There was paint on her jaw, a thumbprint of amber just below her left ear. She saw me and stood, but not with alarm. She set her brush down carefully, wiped her hands on her rag. It did nothing. The stain was old, and inclined her head. "My king, what is your name?" "Ilara, sire. I paint the festival lanterns, and the processional banners, and the hall screens for the solstice, and the—" I know what the painter's room does. I did not actually, in any detail. I knew the lanterns arrived in crates and the banners went up before feasts, and the hall looked different each season, and I had never once visited this room or asked who was responsible. "How long have you worked here?" 7 years, sire. Since I was 18. You didn't speak to my daughter. Ilara looked at me directly, and I felt something shift, not in the room, not in the air, but in the stone beneath my feet. A faint warmth, as if the floor had been lying in sun. It was autumn. There was no sun on the kitchen corridor floor. "She didn't seem to want speaking to," Ilara said. "Everyone speaks to her. They coo. They coax. They bring her toys and sugar and little fur-lined gloves." I noticed. "You've been watching her." "She's been walking past my door for 2 years, sire. I leave it open when I work. She's never stopped before yesterday." "What changed?" Ilara considered this. She picked up the brush Lyra had used and turned it in her stained fingers. "I was late on the lantern order. Usually I have them crated by now, and the door is closed by mid-morning. Yesterday I was still painting when she passed. That's all." "That's all." A closed door, opened by accident. A child, paused by chance. A woman who did not perform, who sat in her plain dress with her stained hands and her unhurried work, and offered nothing but a brush and a dish of paint, and the silence my daughter had been drowning in for 3 years. And Lyra, for the first time, had chosen to stay. "She may come back tomorrow," I said. "I know. I won't instruct you on what to do." "Good." She said it without defiance. Simply a woman who painted lanterns stating a fact about how her workroom operated. "I wouldn't take the instruction, sire. Children aren't lanterns. You can't paint them into shape." I left before I said something foolish. On the walk back to my study, I pressed my hand flat against the corridor wall, and the stone was warm. It should not have been warm. The kitchen corridor faced north. In the harvest month, the north walls of Ashenmere were cold enough to ache. I had lived in this keep my entire life, and I knew its temperatures the way I knew the lake's moods, by the season, by the hour, by the feel of the stone under my palm. Senna used to press her cheek against the south wall in summer and say it was like leaning on a sleeping wolf. After she died, I stopped touching the walls. They had felt cold everywhere, even in sunlight, as though the keep itself was grieving. Now the north corridor was warm, and I could not explain it. Lyra went back the next day, and the next, and the next. I did not spy, or rather, I spied only twice more, standing in the corridor like a man who had lost his way to his own kitchens. What I saw each time was the same. Ilara painting, Lyra sitting nearby, a small brush and paint placed between them without comment. The color changed daily: blue, green, amber, white, a deep red that Lyra handled with particular concentration, painting not circles now but shapes that almost resembled things. A lake, a tree, a face. On the 4th day, the kitchen maid told Gareth, and Gareth told me that Lyra had made a sound. "What sort of sound?" I asked. "A hum, sire. The painter was mixing colors and some of the blue slopped over the bowl. Your daughter, it was a laugh, sire, a small one. Like air escaping, then she went back to painting." I locked my study door so no one would see me sit with my head in my hands. 3 years. 3 years of silence, of watching my daughter become a ghost in her own home, of healers and herbalists, and the woman who claimed she could read a child's wolf spirit through the patterns of her breathing. 3 years of all of it. And Lyra had laughed because paint slopped out of a bowl. On the 6th day, I heard it myself. I was in the corridor. I had given up pretending I had reasons to be there, and through the open door I heard a sound I had not heard since Senna was alive. Small, brief, unmistakable. Lyra giggling. Ilara had flicked a drop of yellow paint off her brush, and it had landed on the lantern Lyra was working on, a lopsided circle that was becoming, I realized with a start, a sun. The yellow drop sat in its center like a bullseye, and my daughter was laughing. Ilara's mouth curved. Not a performance, just the natural response of a person who had caused something slightly absurd and was not sorry about it. "Good aim," Lyra said. I staggered. It was the first word my daughter had spoken in 3 years, and it was said to a woman I had never met before this week, in a room I had never entered, about a drop of yellow paint. Good aim. 2 words. And the world, which had been silent for 1,000 days, cracked open like an egg. Ilara did not gasp. She did not freeze or tear up or turn to look for me in the corridor. She looked at Lyra's sun with its yellow bullseye and said, "Wasn't aiming." And Lyra, my silent, unreachable, glass-eyed Lyra, grinned. I walked to my study. I closed the door. I pressed both hands against the wall, and it was so warm it nearly burned, and I stood there for a long time breathing. Lord Marek arrived an hour later with Lady Brenna of Aldsworth. She was everything the council wanted: tall, composed, well-born, experienced with children, and dressed in the kind of structured velvet that said money and patience in equal measure. She curtsied, and her manners were flawless. She had a calm, intelligent face and the bearing of someone who ran a household of 30 without raising her voice. The council had chosen well. She was, on every measure they knew how to apply, the correct woman. I showed her the keep. I introduced her to the household staff. I walked her through the gardens where Lyra sat among the herbs each morning, and I explained my daughter's silence, the death of her mother, the withdrawal, the 3 years of nothing. Lady Brenna listened with genuine attention and asked careful questions about Lyra's daily habits, her foods, her sleeping. I did not mention the painter's room. I do not know why, or rather I do, but the reason made no sense to me at the time. The room was Lyra's. The silence between Ilara and my daughter was Lyra's. It was the only thing my child had chosen in 3 years, and something in me refused to hand it to a noblewoman I had met an hour ago, no matter how calm and qualified she was. "I'd like to meet her," Lady Brenna said, "on her own terms, no ceremony." It was the right thing to say. I led her to Lyra's chambers, where my daughter sat on the window seat with a book, the same book she had been holding for months, a natural history of the Mere with illustrations Senna had loved, and I knelt beside the window. "Lyra, this is Lady Brenna. She'd like to sit with you if you'll allow it." My daughter looked at Lady Brenna. It was the glass-eyed look, the one that went straight through a person and found the wall behind. She held it for a long moment, long enough that Brenna's composure flickered, just slightly, the way a candle does when a door opens, and then Lyra turned back to her book. Lady Brenna tried. I will say that for her. She sat in the room for an hour, speaking softly, offering to read aloud, asking gentle questions that received no answers. She brought a wooden puzzle the next day, and a set of colored ribbons the day after. She was patient and kind and utterly irrelevant to my daughter, who looked through her every time as though she were a new piece of furniture someone had placed in the room without asking. On the 3rd day of Lady Brenna's stay, Marek came to my study. "It's going well," he said, which was a lie, and we both knew it. "She hasn't looked at her. These things take time. Lady Brenna is patient. My daughter has been patient for 3 years. She doesn't need another patient person sitting in her room. She needs—" I stopped. She needs what, sire? I did not answer, because the answer was a painter in a side room who mixed colors with her bare hands and never once asked Lyra to be anything other than what she already was. And I could not say that to Marek without explaining everything that had happened, and I was not ready to explain it, because I did not understand it myself. Continue with Lady Brenna, I said, but do not interfere with my daughter's daily walks. Marek noted this in his ledger and left. That afternoon, I went to the painter's room. Ilara was there, as she always was, surrounded by lanterns, brush in hand, paint on her jaw. She was working on a series I had not seen before, night scenes, the mere under moonlight, rendered in silver and deep blue on black paper. They were extraordinary. Not pretty, the word was too small. They were the lake as it actually looked at midnight, when the wolves ran the shore and the moon sat on the water like a coin someone had dropped. They were true. "You're very good," I said from the doorway. She looked up. "I know. Has Lyra been today?" "This morning she painted a fish." "A fish?" "It was a good fish, strong tail." I leaned against the doorframe and studied her. Paint-stained hands, undyed dress, hair tied back with a rag, a smudge of silver on her left cheekbone from the night scene she was working on. She met my gaze without flinching. Most people, even council lords, even visiting alphas, looked away from me eventually. Not from fear. I'm not the kind of king who inspires fear, but I carry a weight that others sense without naming, and they step back from it instinctively, the way one steps back from the edge of deep water. Ilara did not step back. She looked at me the way she looked at a blank lantern, with steady, unhurried attention, as though she were deciding what color I was. The stone beneath my feet pulsed warm. "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to answer honestly." "I always answer honestly, sire." "It's a professional hazard. You can't lie to paint." "My council has brought a woman to bond with Lyra, a noble woman, Lady Brenna of Aldsworth. She's qualified, well-born, experienced." "I know who she is. The kitchen staff talk." "Lyra won't look at her." "No. She looks at you. She looks at the paint. I'm incidental." "You're not incidental. You're the first person she's spoken to in 3 years." Ilara set her brush down. I watched her face change, not a dramatic shift, not surprise or pride or the careful arrangement of someone who sees an opportunity, just a settling. A woman who had been told something that confirmed what she already suspected and was deciding what it meant. "2 words," she said. "Good aim. That's not conversation, sire. That's a reflex. It's more than anyone else has gotten. I'm not competing. I paint lanterns. I don't know what you want me to be. I don't want you to be anything. That's the point. You are the only person who has ever sat with my daughter without wanting her to be something she isn't. You gave her a brush and you let her be, and she came back." The room was quiet. The lanterns swayed on their strings in the draft from the corridor. Somewhere in the keep, the kitchen staff were preparing the evening meal, and I could hear the faint clatter of pots, the murmur of voices, the distant bark of a wolf from the lakeshore patrol. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a home that had been going through its motions for 3 years, while the heart of it, my daughter's voice, my own willingness to feel anything at all, stayed silent. Ilara picked up a clean brush and held it out to me. "Sit down," she said. "I beg your pardon." "Sit down, paint something. You look like you haven't done a useless thing in years, and it's making you hard to talk to." No one had spoken to me like that since Senna died. I sat on the floor beside her stool, took the brush, and stared at a blank sheet of paper. "I don't know how to paint," I said. "You don't need to know how. You just need to put the color where it wants to go." I dipped the brush in a pot of deep blue, the same blue Lyra had used on her first day, and made a mark on the paper. A line. Crooked, uncertain, not a lake or a sky or anything I could name. Just blue on white. Ilara nodded, not praise, acknowledgement. Something in my chest, not my wolf, not yet, but something older, something I had locked in a stone room the day Senna's funeral pyre burned down to ash, opened a single, cautious eye. I painted for 20 minutes. The result was terrible, a smear of blue and green that looked like a bruise on the paper. Ilara studied it without mockery. "It's a start," she said. "It's a mess." "Those are the same thing." I left her room with paint on my hands for the first time in my life, and when I pressed my palm to the corridor wall, the warmth was not just in the stone. It was in my skin. It traveled up my arm and settled behind my ribs, and my wolf, 3 years dormant, 3 years curled in a cold den at the back of my mind, lifted its head. Not a surge, not a howl, just a head lifting, ears forward, listening. The next week was the hardest I had known since Senna's death, and the reason was Lady Brenna. She was not a villain. I want to be clear about this, because in the stories wolves tell their pups around winter fires, there is always a villain, the rival Luna, the scheming stepmother, the council lord with ambitions. Lady Brenna was none of these. She was a good woman doing what she had been asked to do, and she did it with grace and dedication. And none of it mattered because my daughter had already chosen, and the choice was a painter in a side room who didn't even know she'd been chosen. What happened was this. Marek, satisfied that Brenna's patience was working, it was not. He was reading the absence of tantrums as progress, proposed that Lyra's daily routine be restructured to include more time with Lady Brenna. Specifically, he proposed that the afternoon hours, when Lyra usually wandered the keep on her circuit, be blocked for supervised activities with Brenna in the East Garden. I agreed because I was tired, and because Marek was not wrong that my daughter needed stability, and because I had not yet understood what I was about to learn. The first day of the new schedule, Lyra walked to the painter's room at her usual time and found the door closed. A guard, on Marek's orders, not mine, redirected her to the East Garden, where Lady Brenna waited with a basket of dried flowers and a patient smile. Lyra sat in the garden. She did not touch the flowers. She did not look at Lady Brenna. She stared at the garden wall, and something in her face closed like a shutter. That evening she did not eat. The second day the same. The third day she walked past the guard outside the painter's room without stopping, not because she had given up, but because the door was still closed and she had learned that it would be. She went to the garden. She sat. She stared. She stopped humming. I heard about the humming from the kitchen maid. Apparently, in the days before the schedule change, Lyra had begun humming while she painted in Ilara's room, not a tune, not a song, just a low, steady sound, the kind a child makes when she is absorbed in something she loves. The maid said it was the most normal sound she had heard from the child in 3 years, and now it was gone. On the fourth day, Lyra walked her morning circuit to the library, sat in the window seat, opened the book she always held, and tore a page out. The household maid who witnessed it stood frozen. In 3 years, Lyra had never damaged anything. She was careful with objects the way she was careful with people, at a distance, without force. She held her mother's book and she tore a page from it, slowly and deliberately, and she looked at the torn page in her hand and her face did nothing. Not anger, not grief, nothing. An emptiness that was worse than either. Gareth brought me the torn page. It was an illustration of the mirror at sunset, the kind of illustration Senna had loved, the kind Ilara painted better. I went to Marek. "End the schedule," I said. "My king." "End it, open the painter's room door, remove the guard, let Lyra walk where she wants to walk. Lady Brenna has been here a week. She deserves more time." My daughter tore a page out of her mother's book. Marek went still. He knew what that book was. Everyone in the keep knew. "In the schedule," I said again, and this time it was not a request. The door opened the next morning. The guard was gone. Lyra walked the kitchen corridor, reached the painter's room, and stopped. The door was open, Elara was inside, painting a lantern cerulean blue, a color like the lake in early morning. She did not look up. Lyra walked in. She sat down. Elara slid a brush across the floor and a dish of cerulean and said nothing. My daughter picked up the brush and she painted, and after 10 minutes she made a sound, a hum, low and steady, the vibration of a small body that was, for the first time in days, exactly where it wanted to be. I stood in the corridor and pressed my hand to the stone, and it was warm, and my wolf was fully awake now, not just lifting its head but standing, 4 legs braced, ears forward, every sense tuned to the woman in that room with a certainty I had not felt since the night Senna and I first. I pulled my hand away. Because I understood what was happening and I was not ready for it, and the guilt was instant and enormous. Senna had been my mate, my fated Luna. The bond had been real and absolute, and it had ended when she died, not frayed, not faded, severed, like a rope cut with a blade. I had felt it go. I had felt the half of me that was hers collapse inward, and I had rebuilt myself around the gap the way a tree grows around a wound, and I had told myself that the gap was permanent, because a bond like that does not happen twice. My wolf disagreed. He had been disagreeing for days in his quiet, patient way. Not howling, not pacing, just pointing. Every time I entered the kitchen corridor, he oriented toward the painter's room the way a compass points north. Every time Elara's voice carried through the open door, low, unhurried, remarking to Lyra that her fish had improved, or that the vermilion was being moody today, my wolf pressed against the walls of my chest as if trying to reach her. I did not know what to do with this. I went to the lake. I stood on the north shore where Senna's pyre had burned, and I looked at the water, and I waited for the guilt to tell me what to do. It didn't. The water held the willow's reflection. The wind was cold. The stone of the old pyre site was smooth beneath my boots, and if I pressed my hand to it, it was just stone, cold, ordinary, bearing no memory of what had burned there. But when I turned back toward the keep, the warmth was still in my skin. And my wolf, patient as the lake itself, said nothing. He just pointed. I began finding reasons to pass through the kitchen corridor. At first it was inspections, the bread stores, the root cellars, the spice inventory. Then it was checking on the lantern progress, which was my responsibility as the keeper of the festival. Then it was nothing. I simply walked the corridor, and I stopped at the painter's room and I watched. Elara and Lyra painting. Elara explaining how to thin a wash, more water, less pigment, let the paper do the work. Lyra listening with the absolute attention children give to people they trust. The lanterns drying overhead like a paper sky. The smell of linseed oil and crushed pigment and the faint sweetness of treated paper. Elara's hands as she worked, stained, capable, steady. The way she held the brush loosely, letting the tip find its own angle. The way she mixed colors without measuring, knowing by instinct how much red made a sunset and how much blue made a winter dusk. The way she glanced at Lyra's work and made adjustments to her own in response, not correcting, but painting alongside. The way a musician plays beside a student so the student can hear the shape of the song. My wolf ached. "Sire." I looked up. Elara was in the doorway and Lyra was behind her, holding a painting, a new one, larger than the small exercises she usually made. It showed the mere at night, silver and deep blue, with a single lantern floating on the water, gold and warm against the dark. "Lyra wants to show you something," Elara said. My daughter stepped forward. She held out the painting. Her eyes, gray like mine, like Senna's had been, were focused and present in a way I had not seen in 3 years. I knelt. I took the painting. It was rough, a child's work, unskilled, the lines wobbly and the proportions wrong, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen because my daughter had made it, had chosen to make it, had carried it to me with her own hands and her own intention for the first time since she was 2 years old. "It's the lake," Lyra said. 4 words. My daughter had spoken 4 words to me. Not to Alara, not to a brush and a dish of paint, but to me, her father, standing in the corridor with his hands full of paper, and his chest full of something so large he could not breathe around it. "It's beautiful," I said, and my voice broke, and Lyra looked at me with the careful assessment of a child who is deciding whether an adult can be trusted with her feelings. Then she reached up and touched my face. Her fingers were cold and paint-stained cerulean on her thumb, gold on her index finger, and she touched my cheek the way she used to when she was very small before Senna died, when reaching for a parent's face was the most natural act in the world. "Don't cry," she said, "the paint will run." Behind her, Alara was watching. Her eyes were bright. Her stained hands were clasped in front of her, and I saw them trembling, the only sign, in all the weeks I had known her, that she was not as steady as she appeared. And my wolf, who had been patient for 3 years and then patient for 3 more weeks, said, that one, the one who did not try, the one who opened a door by accident and changed everything by doing nothing, her. The warmth in the stone walls was not the keep remembering Senna. It was the keep recognizing Alara. And it was not the same bond, it could never be the same, but it was a bond, real and certain and warm as a lit lantern, and it had been there since the first time I stood in her doorway and she looked at me without stepping back. I was not ready. But I was learning from my daughter, from a painter, from a wolf who pointed, that readiness was not required. Some things arrive whether you are ready or not. You open the door or you don't. Lyra had taught me that. The council learned about Alara the way councils always learn about things badly, from the wrong person, at the wrong time. It was Marek who brought it up, 12 days into Lady Brenna's now-stalled visit. I had not dismissed Brenna. She was still housed in the guest chambers, still taking meals with the court, but I had stopped scheduling time between her and Lyra, and the silence around that decision was becoming conspicuous. "The household staff are talking," Marek said. He was standing in my study, not sitting, which meant he was uncomfortable. Marek only stood when he wanted to leave quickly. "They say the princess spends every morning with a painter." "She does." "A festival painter, a woman from the crafters' rolls." "Alara, she paints the lanterns and the processional banners." Marek consulted his ledger as though the information he needed was written there. "Alara, painter, no family name, no standing. Daughter of a journeyman colorist who died 6 years ago. No pack affiliation, not wolf-born." The way he said it, "not wolf-born," carried the weight of every judgment the council would make. In Ashenmere, the court ran on bloodlines. The Alpha's household, the council seats, the ceremonial roles, the candidates they brought for Lyra, all wolf-born, all traceable through the pack records to families who had held standing for generations. A painter with no family name was not even in the ledger they consulted. She existed in the service rolls the way a chair existed in the inventory, functional, present, invisible. "She reached my daughter," I said. "No one else could." "With respect, my king, Lady Brenna has not been given sufficient." My daughter tore a page from her mother's book during Lady Brenna's supervised time. She has spoken 6 words in 3 years, and every one of them was said in that painter's room. Tell me again about sufficient time. Marek closed his ledger. "The council will want to discuss this." "The council can discuss anything it likes. I will not remove Alara from my daughter's life." He left. The discussion happened behind closed doors, in the council chamber, in the hushed tones of men and women who were genuinely worried about their king and their kingdom, and who expressed that worry by making lists of eligible noblewomen. Lady Brenna, to her credit, heard the full account and responded with grace. "The child has chosen," she told me on the morning she departed. "It doesn't matter that I'm more qualified on paper. A child's heart doesn't read paper." "You're generous." "I'm practical. I have 2 nieces who taught me that you cannot make a child love you by being correct." She paused at the door of her carriage. "The painter." "Does she know?" Know what? Lady Brenna looked at me with the steady patience of a woman who had raised children, and could see a besotted man more clearly than he could see himself. Never mind, she said. You'll figure it out. Wolves usually do. She left, and I stood on the keep steps watching her carriage descend the lakeside road, and I thought about what she had said, and about what I had not yet said, and about the warmth in the walls that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with a woman whose hands were the color of every season at once. The Lantern Festival was 12 days away. In Ashenmere, the festival was not merely a tradition, it was the pulse of the kingdom. For 300 years, the pack had gathered on the last night of the harvest moon, and the Alpha had walked the processional from the keep to the water's edge, carrying the first lantern, and the kingdom followed, and 200 painted lights were set on the mere to carry the summer home. The lanterns were painted by the festival staff, and now, by extension, by Alara. Every color that touched the lake's surface on that night had passed through her hands. I had attended 33 lantern festivals and never once thought about the person who painted them. This year, I could think of nothing else. Alara was working longer hours now, dawn to well past dark, the side room crowded with drying lanterns and paint pots, and the careful, measured chaos of a craft executed at full capacity. Lyra was there every morning, painting beside her, and I was there every afternoon, standing in the doorway, watching. "You're hovering," Alara said on the 4th day of this arrangement. "I'm supervising. The festival is in 8 days. You've never supervised the festival painters in your life. I'm starting a new tradition." She gave me a look dry, direct, the exact expression she wore when Lyra's fish were lopsided, and went back to her lantern. It was a night scene, silver and blue, and the light she had painted on the water was so real I could almost feel its warmth. "Sit down," she said, the way she had said it the first time. "You're making the lanterns nervous." I sat. She handed me a brush. I painted badly, as before, a smear of blue that was neither the lake nor the sky but something between. Alara glanced at it. "You're improving," she said. "You're lying." "Slightly, but you're holding the brush better." Lyra, across the table, laughed. It was a real laugh, not the small escape-tear sound of the first weeks, but a proper giggle, the kind a child makes when adults are being ridiculous, and she knows it. It filled the room the way the lantern light filled the dark scenes Alara painted, warm, present, and so unexpected that both Alara and I went still. Then Alara looked at me, and I looked at her, and the warmth in the stone walls was nothing compared to the warmth in the room itself, which was not a room in a keep but a place where 3 people were learning to be together, and my wolf pressed against my ribs and said again, with infinite patience, "Her, you already know." I knew. I had known since she handed me a brush and told me to put the color where it wanted to go. I had known since she sat with my daughter without speaking and let the silence be enough. I had known since she looked at me without stepping back. I knew the way you know a lake is deep, not because someone tells you, but because you can see the dark going down. The bond was not the same as Senna's. It could never be, and I did not want it to be. Senna's bond had been fire, sudden, consuming, absolute from the first touch. This was different. This was a door left open by accident, a brush placed without comment, a warmth that grew in stone walls and in the space between silences. This was a bond that arrived the way Alara herself arrived, without announcement, without performance, steady and certain, and absolutely unwilling to be anything other than what it was. I did not tell her, not yet, not because I was afraid, although I was, but because I wanted her to arrive at it the way she arrived at everything, in her own time, with her own hands, without anyone instructing her on what to feel. 5 days before the festival, Marek convened the council. I was not invited. This was unusual. The council did not meet without the Alpha, but Marek's message was carefully worded. A session to review the festival arrangements, nothing requiring the king's presence, routine matters. I let it happen because I was curious about what they would say when they thought I was not listening. Gareth, bless his practical soul, stood outside the council chamber door and reported every word. The discussion lasted 2 hours. The substance was this. The Alpha King of Ashenmere, 4 years a widower, had formed an attachment to a festival painter with no family name, no wolf-born standing, and no qualifications for any position in the king's household beyond the one she already held. The child's bond with the painter was acknowledged as real and beneficial. The king's bond, suspected but unconfirmed, was the concern. Marek argued for caution. A painter could be employed. She did not need to be elevated. The child's needs and the king's needs were separate, and the council's responsibility was to the kingdom, not to the king's private sentiments. Lady Estrid, the eldest member of the council and the only one who had known Senna, said one sentence that Gareth repeated to me with particular care. The child chose. When has a child's choosing ever been wrong about a mate bond? The council adjourned without a resolution. I went to the painter's room. Ilara was alone, Lyra had gone to bed, and she was painting the last of the ceremonial lanterns, the one that would lead the processional. It was her finest work. The scene was the keep above the mere, lit from within, every window gold, the willows bending silver, and on the lake's surface a single reflection that was not the keep but a wolf, my wolf, rendered in moonlight and water, more accurate than any portrait I had ever seen of myself. "You've been painting me," I said. She did not startle. She set her brush down and looked at the lantern, then at me. "I paint what I see. And you see my wolf." "I see you, sire. The wolf is part of you. It's been waking up." "You can tell." "I can tell because the walls are warm. I can tell because you sit on my floor and hold a brush like it's a sword and paint blue smears that mean nothing and everything, and you come back the next day and do it again. I can tell because your daughter laughed and you broke and you tried to hide it and you couldn't." She stood. Her hands were shaking again, the only crack in her composure, the tremor that said she felt as much as I did and was as terrified. "I paint lanterns, sire. I've painted them for 7 years. I know what light looks like when it's trying to get out." "And what does it look like?" "Like you standing in my doorway, every day this month." The stone floor was warm. The lantern swung overhead. My wolf pressed forward, not with urgency but with the absolute certainty of an animal who has found what it was looking for and will not be redirected. "Ilara." "Yes." "The bond." "I know," her voice was quiet. "I've known for weeks." I didn't say anything because I didn't think. A painter, sire. The council would sooner hang my lanterns from a pyre than see me beside you. The council doesn't choose my mate. The bond does. "And your daughter." "My daughter chose you before my wolf did. She handed you the authority the day she picked up that brush." Ilara's eyes were bright. Her hands were still. She looked at me the way she looked at a finished lantern, with the steady, exhausted satisfaction of someone who had put everything she had into a piece of work, and was seeing it, finally, whole. "I'm not going to scrub the paint from my hands," she said. "If you want a queen with clean hands, I'm the wrong woman. I don't want clean hands. I want the hands that gave my daughter a brush and gave me back my wolf." She stepped forward. I took her stained fingers in mine, amber and cobalt and the ghost of vermilion, and the bond, which had been growing in the walls and the stone and the silences for weeks, settled into place the way a lantern settles onto water. Gently, completely, with a warmth that the dark could not diminish. On the last night of the harvest moon, the keep emptied. Every wolf in Ashenmere walked the processional road from the keep to the lake. The torches were lit. The willows bent silver in the moonlight. The mere lay black and still, waiting to receive the lanterns it had carried for 300 years. I walked at the head of the procession, as every alpha before me had done. I carried the first lantern, the ceremonial one, the one Ilara had painted, with the keep and the wolf and the light in the water. It weighed almost nothing. It weighed everything. Beside me, Lyra walked. She held her own lantern, the one she had painted in Alara's room over the course of 3 weeks, a wobbly sun with a yellow bullseye in the center, a silver lake, a lopsided fish with a strong tail. She carried it with both hands carefully, the way she carried everything now, with intention, with presence, with the focus of a child who had come back to the world and intended to stay. Behind us the court followed, Merrick and the council, the household staff, the guards, the kitchen maid who had first seen Lyra stop in the painter's room doorway. Gareth, who had reported every word, and was now watching the proceedings with the expression of a man who had suspected this outcome, and was quietly satisfied. And behind them all, at the back of the procession, where the festival staff walked, the ones who set the torches and laid the path and hung the garlands and painted every lantern that would touch the water tonight, Alara. She had not wanted to be at the front. She had said this clearly the morning of the festival when I asked her to walk beside me. "I'm the painter, sire. I walk with the paint." "You walk where I ask you to walk." "You can ask, I can decline. You said you wouldn't instruct me." She was right, I had said that. And she was right to hold me to it, because the thing I loved about her, the thing my daughter had recognized before I did, the thing my wolf had pointed to with 3 years' patience, was that she could not be instructed into being something she wasn't. She was a painter. She walked with the paint. So I changed the plan. The procession reached the lake. The court arranged itself along the shore, lanterns held high, the warm glow of 200 painted lights reflecting in the black water. The night was cold and clear and still, and the mere held the moon's reflection like a second moon beneath the surface. I walked to the water's edge. I knelt. I held the ceremonial lantern above the surface, and the court went quiet, and the wolves along the tree line went still, and the night waited. "This lantern was painted by Alara," I said. My voice carried across the water the way it always did, the Alpha's voice, the king's, built for halls and battlefields. But tonight it carried something else. Every lantern here was painted by her. Every festival, every year, the colors this kingdom sets on the water came from her hands. We have floated her work for 7 years without knowing her name. I know it now. I set the lantern on the water. It drifted, gold and silver, and the keep's reflection trembled in the ripple. "Alara," I said. A murmur through the court. Merrick shifted, the council stirred, but I was not looking at them. I was looking at the back of the procession, where Alara stood among the festival staff, holding a lantern she had not intended to carry to the front, wearing her undyed dress with paint on her hands and moonlight on her face, and I watched her understand what I was doing, not a decree, not a claiming, not a spectacle, a naming. The kingdom was going to know who painted the light. "Alara," I said again, "come to the water." She came. She walked through the parted court the way she walked through everything, steadily, without performance, without apology. The lanterns overhead lit her face and her stained hands and the silver smudge on her cheekbone that she had not wiped away, and the court watched, and the wolves watched, and Merrick watched with his ledger closed for once, and no one spoke. She reached the water's edge. She knelt beside me. Lyra broke free from the court. She ran, my silent, careful, measured daughter ran across the shore and threw herself between us, her painted lantern clutched in both hands, and she looked up at me with Senna's gray eyes and said, in a voice clear enough to carry across the mere, "She stays." The court inhaled, 200 people, one breath. And the bond, which had been growing in stone walls and painted lanterns, and the space between silences for weeks, blazed open. Not fire, not the searing jolt I had felt with Senna. This was a lantern catching, a flame touched to paper, and the paper suddenly bright, and the brightness spreading outward across the dark water of everything I had lost, illuminating what was still here. Alara, Lyra, the paint on all our hands, the fact that a door left open by accident had let in the rest of my life. Alara looked at me, Her hands were trembling, her eyes were steady. "The paint's never coming off," she said. "I know." I took her hand, stained, warm, shaking, and held it in front of the court, the council, the wolves, the mirror, the moon, and the 200 lanterns she had painted with her own steady, stained, irreplaceable hands. "My Luna," I said, "if she'll have me." Elara looked at Lyra. Lyra looked at Elara. My daughter held up her lantern, the wobbly sun, the silver lake, the lopsided fish, and placed it in Elara's free hand. "She'll have you," Lyra said. "I asked her yesterday." The court laughed. It was the first sound, and it was not mocking. It was the startled, helpless laughter of people who have watched a miracle happen through a child and do not know what else to do. Merrick's mouth twitched. Gareth covered his with his hand. Lady Estrid, at the front of the council, bowed her head, not in submission but in recognition, the way one bows to something that has been true for longer than anyone knew. Elara set Lyra's lantern on the water beside mine. 2 lanterns drifting together, one painted by a master, one painted by a child, both bright, both afloat. Then she looked at me, and my wolf settled, not into silence, not into absence, but into the steady, warm presence of a creature that has come home and intends to stay. "You know," she said, "you're still a terrible painter." "I know." "Lyra's better." "I know." "Good, as long as that's established." I kissed her hand, paint and all, and set the last lantern on the water, and the mirror held 300 years of light, and for the first time since Senna died, the dark was not empty. It was full. Tonight the keep is quiet, not the quiet of absence, the heavy, suffocating silence that filled these halls for 3 years when Lyra would not speak and I would not feel, and the walls went cold from one end of the kingdom to the other. This is a different quiet. A held breath quiet, the kind that comes after the lanterns are lit, and the festival is over, and the keep draws inward, warm. Lyra is asleep between us, paint on her fingers. Her fish has improved, strong tail, better proportions, a credible attempt at scales, and her latest one is pinned to the wall of my study beside the wobbly face she drew when she was 2. 2 pieces of art, 3 years apart. The gap between them is a silence that no longer needs to be filled, because the person who filled it is asleep between us, breathing softly, her cerulean thumb tucked against Elara's wrist. Elara's eyes are closed, but she is not asleep. I know this because her hand, resting on Lyra's back, is still moving, the faint, habitual motion of a painter whose fingers never fully stop. She is painting in her sleep, or pretending to sleep, or simply lying here in the warmth of a keep that has not been warm in 3 years and letting herself feel it. The walls are warm. I press my hand to the stone beside the bed, and it answers not the desperate, searching warmth of those first weeks, when the bond was growing in the foundations and I did not understand what it meant, but a settled, permanent warmth, the kind that stays through winter. The keep knows. The wolves know. The mirror, carrying its lanterns out into the last of the autumn dark, knows. My wolf is quiet, not dormant, not gone, present, warm, curled in the bright den at the center of my chest, exactly where the gap used to be. He does not need to point anymore. He has arrived. Elara opens one eye. "You're awake," she says. "I'm awake." "Stop touching the wall and go to sleep." "The wall is warm." "The wall has been warm for a month. It will be warm tomorrow. Go to sleep." I close my eyes. Lyra breathes between us, small and steady. The lanterns on the mirror are drifting out, carrying the summer home, and in the morning Elara will sit on her low stool with her stained hands and her unhurried brush and paint the first banner of the winter season, and Lyra will sit beside her and paint a fish, and I will stand in the doorway pretending to have business in the kitchen corridor, and no one in the keep will believe me, and no one will care. She handed my daughter a brush. That was all. A brush and a dish of paint and the silence to use it. And Lyra, who had been waiting for 3 years for someone who would not ask her to be something she wasn't, picked it up, and spoke, and brought me back to the world I thought I had lost. The paint never did come off Alara's hands. I would not have it any other way.